I have a million slides because I'm really visual. So sit back, relax, pull out your popcorn, and we're going to move fast. Laura, every time I do this, no, I'll just go, yeah. So I'm just going to talk a bit. I'm going to do what the lovely lady did yesterday, tell you exactly what I'm going to tell you, and then tell you in more detail. So my organisation was created in early 2012. It's a national not-for-profit. It's really small and humble. We are, though, interesting because we are a direct response to Thomas Berry's The Great Work. I mean, a lot of what we do is like looking at that book going, that's a great idea. How do we translate that theory into something practical in this context? I come, although I'm a lawyer and I have a PhD and I teach and do a bunch of things, I spent 10 years working with Aboriginal friends on community development projects. Really humble, no resources, scrounging around at the bottom of society, trying to fight colonialism, really hardcore, really hard work. And floating back into environmental stuff through the PhD was actually a much easier. PhD was hard, but nothing like, as everyone knows, working in Indigenous communities in a colonial situation. So can you just pull those up to the side? Thank you. So our work is interesting in a number of ways because it actually started as a part-time interest, the folks who created it. But over the 5 years, of sort of up until the last year and a half, it's just been a part-time thing that we all did around paid work. But in that time, we've now got a lovely space, 3,000 people on a mailing list, hundreds of people in our direct professional network. We work across the nation, in and out of lots of other universities and organisations. We've got about 20 professional volunteers and a gazillion students, and it's really fun. It's depressing and positive and important, and we love it. So that's the overview. Next. Very quickly, our mission is to promote the understanding and practical implementation of Earth-centred law, governance, and ethics. We focus very much on the framing of Earth jurisprudence because we're Barryites, but ecological law and governance is obviously hugely important. The red bits to remind me to tell you that we carry out our work by supporting multidisciplinary teams of professionals engaged a little in research, but really we're the translators of research into practical stuff through education, community capacity building, and over the last few years, creating alternative models of governance. Actually, because we're small and nimble, we have permission to play. We can do stuff, we can dream it up, and if it doesn't work, we pull it down. It's not a biggie for us. So that's becoming a really interesting space. Civil society folks are really interested in that. I was about to press the button. Next. Thanks. I'm not going to talk about the words. I'm going to skip through everything so you have a taste of who we are. I'll go back one. Yeah, sorry, I shouldn't do this. Our vision is really focused on ecological limits. We're really, really interested in how we might live within ecological limits, acknowledging and respecting the rights of nature to exist, thrive, and regenerate. Very interested in having a society guided by earth ethics as a central point. Obviously, it's a deep inspiration from Indigenous cultures and hopefully our own lost culture. And obviously, the key focus is on nurturing and restoring, not destroying the health of the wider earth community. And the difference between us and other groups is simply that we're governance nerds. We're really, really interested in the nuts and bolts, both the big picture and the minutiae of how things fit together. I would say we're less legal and much more governance, but I'll talk about that. Every time I have an automatic finger response, I think that's going to be a cue. I would be forever grateful for the fabulous Peter Byrne for hosting the first Wild Law Conference in 2009, where I met and instantly fell in love with Earth laws, Earth jurisprudence, and everything Thomas Berry. It was wonderful. The following year, another colleague set up another conference. After that one, a group of us got together and I said, I'll run the next conference, but let's have a committee. That little organising committee turned into an organisation. And then for 2 or 3 years, we kind of just plodded around. I wanted to do a roadshow, check out who was out there, what else was going on in Australia, and it started to grow. Next. That is a photo from our conference in 2008. Oh, I'm not even going to point out who I am. I'm unrecognisable. I'm so young then. Next slide, please. Our inspiration, these can go really quick. Next. Our inspiration, of course, Thomas Berry. I'm not sure what all that is, but that's fun. Next slide, please. Yeah, the universe story. In our presentations, we actually talk about the universe story. Most lawyers find that quite bizarre, but they get into it. They really enjoy it. Next slide, please. This was our original kind of platform. The Great Work. Sorry. I figured I'm bellowing. I'm loud enough. The Great Work, and I'll just pause long enough to say that this critique of the underpinning structures of industrialised society is a godsend. Until I found that book, I found it a little bit chaotic as into how I could have a personal and professional response, looking at the 4 fundamental establishments: law and government, economics, universities, and religion. So I'll come back to that in a moment. Keep going, please.
Cormac Cullinan's book was obviously great inspiration too. I see that as a sort of specific call to the legal aspects of our governance systems. And one of the lovely quotes, I've put it there at the bottom, what I think is really important, and it certainly informs the way we work within AELA, is this reminder that as lawyers, we have to bring our whole selves to the party if we're going to be effective in responding to the crisis. Next slide, please. Send the next one. So our response. Interestingly, as we started to come together in 2012, 2013, the Abbott government was at its heyday, very similar to your Harper government. So we're dealing with a group that obliterated state support for climate change. They cut funding to everything you can think of, whether it was Aboriginal programs, the environmental defenders offices, everything. So I'm sitting there as one of the folks on the steering group going, well, you know, what can we do in this space? What can we do to explore Earth jurisprudence in Australia, given trying to focus on law reform would be really banging your head against a wall right now. So I took personally my community development background and thought, well, let's see who's out there. We did the roadshow, and we knew there were limitations for a very small organisation. But what we did find was this phenomenal response from everyone we gave talks to, particularly anyone who wasn't a lawyer. I was instantly surprised at permaculturalists, artists, scientists, people caring for country. Like, it was awesome. There was just this lovely positive involvement and interest. So that, if you doze off through any of my other slides, that's probably the most important thing as a on-the-ground response to doing what we're doing. The broad-scale interest and the hunger for these frameworks is just wonderful, you know. So next slide, please. To keep a space where we could play, I designed this 5-stage, it's like the 5 core themes of our work: changing culture, reconnecting law and governance with what matters. And at the time, that was really driven by this, you know, we were devastated when they cut the Climate Council, you know, all these things were happening in 2012. So we saw AELA's job as being one of the many little groups that was kind of saying, science matters, knowledge matters, Indigenous knowledge matters. We can have a lot of different epistemologies. We can handle this difference, you know. And building community. We focus in on supporting civil society. At this stage, we don't bother knocking on the door of government because we're a little bit too out there for them. Not in a, you know, I don't have dreadlocks, but the ideas we have are not of interest to them yet, but we're working on a couple of strategies. The other theme is this creating alternatives. Like I said, that's become really fun and very exciting. Transforming law and structure is the ultimate goal, but we're very realistic about our potential to play a part in that space. So what we're doing is building all these other parts to do the soft entry point and to help lay the pathway for this work. Next slide, please. That is just a bunch of stuff we're doing under each theme, but don't freak out. Next slide. Okay. In changing culture, education has always been the thing we do a lot of. Future dreaming is the partnership relationships we have with our Indigenous friends, and the arts. Next slide, please. So future dreaming is really important to me. I spent 10 years working with Aboriginal mates in Central Queensland. And everything I do within AELA is in partnership with a couple of Aboriginal friends who are also in our advisory group. We have a yarn, we talk things through. It's contentious sometimes, it's tricky. But we also do some cross-cultural workshops, and we're going to start doing a lot more immersive experiences. So future dreaming to me is just like breathing. We have to do everything we're doing with that constant tension of, yes, we are framing it from a Thomas Berry European white fella sort of way, but in Australia, everything we do has to be going, how do we fit this together? How do we move forward somehow together? So, next slide. Education, what's been fun is the community workshops are really excellent. I'll talk anywhere, anytime. I think Pete knows that. Getting me to shut up is the problem. But I talk anywhere from, you know, schools to university for the third age, retired folks. But last year was really excellent because we introduced the first Earth jurisprudence course into Australia. That was one of the reasons I went and worked at the CEJ in Florida for a while. And next year we've got all these pilot projects in high schools. And again, we've had 30 years of environmental education in Australia, and all kids that go through that understand the importance of trees and life and oxygen, but they are not taught to critically think about our governance systems. And law and justice studies, even in grade 11 and 12 in high school, are really interested in what we're talking about because they know it's kind of pushed to the side. They just charge through and teaching some basic law. So there's a real interest in that framing. Next slide, please. Earth arts, oh my God, I could wax lyrical about this project forever. The artists that come out of the woodwork to come and play with AELA has been an utter delight. There are now several dozen of them, and they've formed their own Earth Arts collective, which myself and an amazing professor of arts, Griffith, run together. We did a big national thing last year. This is all done with no money, by the way. We're all volunteers, and we've just been too busy to think about funding, so we better get onto that. But we managed to have a national exhibition in Brisbane, about 12 different exhibitions around Australia, just small, just humble, but getting the word out. And next slide, please. If you have a moment and you're at all interested, that, and I'll leave the slides with you, I won't go through it, that was what we invited artists to address and express, kind of explicit, have a look at these issues, how the current governance system works, what we want to move to. And there are so many artists out there already, next slide, that are engaging in that space. So within reconnecting with what matters, I won't talk too long about it, but just wanted to mention, you know, we're fascinated by and work with folks who are exploring how we ensure Indigenous knowledge and science sort of are presented as both equally important pieces of ways of learning and knowing and thinking. So next slide, please. We also have an eco-spirituality thread, and that has opened up the very big world of Berryitism, because all around Australia, there's all these faith groups and other deep ecology folks who are connected. And I often get invited to talk with them because they're fascinated that any lawyer would be engaging with Thomas Berry. So then you have to talk about the great work, and they really dig it. They like the work we do. Next slide. The earth ethics side of stuff is really important to me. We've been dabbling around the edges of that. This year we've got a really cool conference in November with some amazing people, ethicists, environmental psychologists, environmental educators, Indigenous people, artists, people in business and law. We're all coming together for this great big whirling around. We're going to do some publications out of it, but also it's about us mapping out what kind of things we can do to inform our education and other activities. Next, please. So within building community, we do a whole bunch of stuff. We see the education as building community, but next slide, please. This has been popping up as something really important. We nicknamed it Leafy. It's not a formal thing, but we are local economies and earth-friendly initiatives. Isn't it cute? And it matches our logo. Everywhere we go at the community level, there's a real need for strong governance and legal support to help build the organisations that are doing the grassroots restoration work. And it's a really nice space to do creative and proactive use of the law, but not in a traditional environmental law kind of way. It's using the legal expertise of a lot of my young law professionals and volunteers, very inspired by the work that SELP do in California. And what's really wonderful is you get to spend days doing workshops with people who are managing land, looking after country, caring for creatures, and what you're doing as a lawyer is helping them think through how the governance stuff works, right from the big picture, how it all fits together, understanding the legal basis of the Constitution and private property ownership, but also into that transactional stuff around, do they want to form some kind of cooperative, an association, a not-for-profit company? And most of all, we get to talk to people about animals. Next slide, please. That is a sugar glider. Isn't it adorable? And next one, that's a baby sugar glider. Oh, isn't it cute? The stuff that gets me up every day. Next slide, please. So in addition to all of that stuff, we've obviously been involved with the Global Alliance for the Rights of Nature. Next slide, please. And we see our international connections as very much part of building community. AELA is little, Australia is distant. For us to stay connected with all the cool ideas and the interesting developments, it's one of the reasons I flew my family halfway across the planet, which I don't do much, to be here, because I really respect what E4A are doing. And it's a way of filtering cool ideas and bringing them down and saying, what do we do with them? We're a formal associate with Earth Charter, and we're members of all these other groups and get involved with stuff. Thank you very much. Next slide. Okay, so the creating alternatives is really cool, and I've only got 3 minutes left, so we'll whiz through it quick. Next slide, please. We created, in the blink of an eye, the Australian Centre for the Rights of Nature. Sounds very grand. We just made it up one day, and now we're bringing in all these really nice academic friends to start filling that up with cool ideas. So we have got a range of little things bubbling with communities who are interested in local lawmaking around like the CELDEF approach. We're about to launch, just for the heck of it, damn it, a campaign about the rights of nature for the Great Barrier Reef. We don't expect to actually create law reform in our country at the moment, but it's about opening up a space for communities to see Earth democracy as linked to rights of nature. Got this very excellent project exploring the legal status of nature series, and I'm inviting several folks here to come speak at an international symposium in Australia next October. That has been mind-blowing. We're getting elders speaking with people like Chief Justice Preston from the New South Wales Land and Environment Court, actually exploring what, you know, all the legal mechanisms around both Indigenous and non-Indigenous. And I've been doing this stuff for a while, and even a seminar a month ago with the judge and Mary Graham was just amazing. And students were like falling over themselves to go up and have a yarn to these people. Very exciting when people have that energy. Next slide. So the International Tribunal for the Rights of Nature was created by the Ecuadorian folks when we were all together in January 2014. We have the Global Alliance for the Rights of Nature been running these international tribunals every year. They've been connecting them to the COP. Next slide, please. I was very fortunate to be there for the first one, and I spoke for the Great Barrier Reef. There's Vandana Shiva, she was president of that one. Next slide. I then went through cancer treatment in 2015, and that slowed down AELA somewhat. I got locked into chemo and such, but what was really nice is I couldn't go to Paris, so I thought, bugger it, I'll run my own tribunal. Damn it, if I can't go to the world, I'll do my own. So we put together this really excellent event. That's our groovy logo. Next one, please. Next one, I'll just show you some photos. The tribunal was held in one of the Supreme Court buildings in Queensland, and this was an image I'd been looking forward to, our Aboriginal folks in front of the esteemed white judges, and it was an electric moment. There were about 250 people in the audience who you can't see. Next one, please. If you can just move through, I just want to show people, that's our happy, smiling panel. There's some of our audience. Muramu from Yidinji Nation in Cairns, Blair Palisi from 350.org, Valentine from Palm Island, a gorgeous Aboriginal friend of mine. Next. People, yes, people. And okay, so that's some of the work we do. This year, my brain has been eaten by the new economy work we're doing. So next slide, please. We realized that a critical pathway within the whole earth-centeredness stuff was the economy. And we knew that in Australia, we did not have a network like some folks have, like there's the New Economy Coalition in the US, there's the New Economics Foundation, which isn't really a network. Then you've got the New Economy Organisers Network. There's all this stuff around the world. And anyway, short story is 2 or 3 of us sat together and said, let's have a gathering. We want to start these things at the conference. And now we're building a network. We've got about 100 organisations involved, 700 people on the mailing list. It's a nightmare for governance stuff. We're trying to build a way that it's grassroots driven, etc. But it's really important. And next slide, please. And so what we've done in the 2 conferences we've done, and this is the first time I've seen it actually happen in the way that we did it, was bringing together everyone from folks interested in Indigenous community-based economics through to the renewable energy, the food systems, alternative food, transport, housing, commons sharing, the alternative currencies, the Bitcoin gang. It's just amazing bringing them together. Next slide, please. And to us, that's a really important quote for the New Economy Network. If we're going to talk about building earth-centered governance, and I was chatting about this with Massimiliano, what the biggest concern I have is for the last 30 years, environmental law and the environmental movement is all about what we can't do. What we're trying to do within AELA is actually say, you know what, we're going to focus very much on what we want to do and what we want to build and what's important. Next slide, please. I'm out of time, but I'll just have 2 more minutes. So you can see in that very speedy response, the kinds of stuff we're trying to do to focus in on law, government, economics, and then education to universities. Next slide, please. But the big question that we get hit with by all of our community groups is, theory is great, these chunks are good. How do we, on the ground, address the ecological crisis? How do we do this? Next slide, please. There's a whole bunch of other slides that I'm going to leave if people would like to have a look at it. This GreenPrints project is a pathway. Next slide, actually. It focuses on one critical question: how do we create governance and legal systems that help us live within ecological limits and nurture the Earth community? And it's a bit of a baby of mine. I'm really interested in how it's going to map out, and it actually brings a whole lot together. And if you could just quickly go through my slides. I'm not going to talk, I promise. Keep going. You can read that. Okay, keep going. They're the problems, but look, that's the map of Indigenous Australia, 1788. We had these phenomenal more than 500 language groups. Next one. And then we turned it into that. And consequences of that, that's the loss of forests. That just shows the jurisdictional response. Complete lack of capacity for our current jurisdictional or legal system to talk about the environment. Next slide. Keep going. Everyone knows that one. Keep going. So we've got all this stuff. Keep going. Ecoregions, bioregions, subregions, and then communities are engaging in the work through a bioregional approach, but not bioregionalism. And there's all these cool little modes of stuff we're doing. We've got 3 pilot communities, one in Victoria, one on Palm Island, somewhere else, northern New South Wales. And it's just their way as civil society of engaging with what they might do to make an earth-centered governance system. And the cool thing for lawyers is that within it, we're going to be looking at how you retrofit. This is all idealism, but then you would have, in fact, a map for how we can do things on the ground. I'm out of time by at least a minute. Thank you. Can you just go down to the very end? Just go down to the very end. Just to show my picture. Oh, these are the graphics we use to explain to people what GreenPrints is about. I'm just actually going to show you. There's some of us. Yay for us. And that. I just thought I'd share my owl. There you go. Thank you, guys. Thank you for listening to me talk 100 miles a minute. That is AELA.
Sounds very much like your how do we get there team.
Yeah, we are. And we're really interested in that. And we're prepared to have a go, you know.
This one fit just right.
Yeah, this is right on. We are not, we don't have too much time, but we can take 1 or 2 questions.
If anyone is still awake.
Yes.
Hello.
Hi, I think I've heard this phrase before, but I don't know that I understand it. Can you speak a little more about the caring for country concept?
And Peter can contribute too, but it's an Australian thing. It's I don't know what your equivalent is here, but caring for country is like an anglicised version of how Aboriginal people speak about land. So country is not just land. Country is the spirit. Country is the whole kit and caboodle. So when a white fella says caring for country, what we're trying to convey is a greater connection to the place. Mary Graham always says, I think it's Descartes says, you know, I think, therefore I am. No, it wasn't him, it was the other dude. I think, therefore I am. She says, it was. She says, as an Aboriginal woman, I am located, therefore I am. So the notion that they are country. And see, that map of all those territorial estates, you know, and this is the thing a lot of folks forget. The Indigenous culture in Australia is remarkable. It's 60 to 70,000 years old, based on scientific understanding. I mean, these people have been scientifically proven to have the soils of their country in their DNA, you know, like they've been there that long. They were one of the most remarkable groups because they didn't come in and keep moving. Apparently they came in and stayed put, and then the next generation might have moved on, but it's quite a remarkable mode of movement. So their connection to country is like all Indigenous groups, deep. And so caring for country is just one kind of white fella way of expressing something that's way deeper than just...
And within the rights system, when they're asked to express, like, what's your primary right that you're claiming, that would be the right to care for country.
Obligation. And Mary, that's why I love having Mary Graham in our conversations. She always pushes back the obligation. Anyway, but did you want to add to that?
No,
was it Deborah Bird Rose or someone was talking about, you know, country isn't a place, it's a spirit. You know, country feels sick, country feels well, country feels good. Yeah, it's the spirit of the place. And caring for country it kind of just captures everything. I love it. Smells like eucalyptus if you think about it carefully.
One more comment. Yes.
I think one of the things I really appreciate about the work AELA is doing is it is so depressing being in Australia with the kinds of rollbacks.
Yes.
And we spend most of our time fighting to preserve legislation which was ineffective in the first place. And the fact that you are holding out possibilities and alternatives is really heartening. And I guess maybe I could turn it into a question. It's more of a comment, but I wonder how that space is to work in, like when, you know, it is so hard yeah.
Well, it's a great question, and I'm sure people here can relate to this, or maybe your experience is different in academia, I can't say, but when I've been the chairperson of a group called the Environmental Defenders Office of Queensland for 6 years, and the EDOs are like the lovely lady who spoke yesterday about the Quebec Legal Centre. You know, they're on the front line, they're using the existing legal system to fight to preserve what they've got. And that work is really important, but eventually I decided that my energy, the way I'm built, is a little different. I'm not so much of resisting everything all the time. I've got this creative urge. So the really weird thing is that working within AELA, even in the depressing context of everything we're fighting, because I do also go off to protests and do other things. I do that part of my life. It's a joy. Doing AELA work is a joy, and that's why we've just drawn people to us. I've got students. I've got a guy volunteering for me now, 5 years later, Stephen Briggs, who was a student volunteer. He's now a graduate lawyer. But they're all they become addicted to AELA if they stick around, you know, and they love it because it's one of the only spaces they get to be truly creative. As to our impact, I don't know. I'm trying to work that out. I do evaluation stuff, but yeah, it's depressing, but it
gives you energy.
Gets me out of bed. Yeah. And thanks, Pete.
We have to move on.
Oh, we'll chat at lunch. Thanks, everyone.
There will be space.